Hey, today on Animal Quests, 6 people came face to face with a bear, and the few seconds that decided how it ended for each of them. From a hiker in the mountains of Romania who stopped to photograph a bear that had learned to expect food, to a camper in the high Arctic who did everything the guides told him and still woke to the worst thing in the world. But first, a marathon runner in Montana who came around one blind bend a few seconds too fast into the one animal you never want to surprise. The morning of August 10th, 2019 was cool and bright in the mountains of northwest Montana, where a small trail marathon ran its course through miles of national forest. It was the kind of race people train years for, a long, hard loop that climbs through timber and open meadow and drops back down again, most of it far from any road. The runners had set off at first light and spread out over the miles the way they always do, until many of them were running alone for long stretches with no one in sight ahead or behind. Diane Cook was somewhere in the middle of the field, on her own, moving well and feeling good about her race. Diane was 49, an experienced distance runner who had done hard mountain races before and knew this kind of country. She knew there were grizzlies in these mountains, the way everyone who spends time up here knows it. As a fact, you file away and mostly do not think about while you run. The race briefing had mentioned it. So had the signs at the trailhead. By the second half of the course, the field had thinned right out. Diane had not seen another runner in a good stretch, which is normal on a loop like this. Everyone settling into their own pace and their own private effort somewhere out in the trees. The trail here ran through thick timber and heavy brush, climbing and turning, with plenty of blind corners where the path bent around a rise or a stand of trees, and you could not see more than a few yards ahead. She was running steadily, watching her footing on the rough ground, her own breathing loud in her ears. A runner moving fast makes very little of the noise a bear needs to know a person is coming. Quiet, quick, and with the wind in her face, coming around a blind bend, a person can be right on top of an animal before either one has any idea the other is there. Just off the trail ahead of Diane, in the heavy brush, a grizzly sow was with her cubs. This is the exact thing every wildlife person up there loses sleep over. A quiet runner, a blind corner, and a mother bear with cubs behind it. A grizzly has no interest in a person as food and does not go looking for a fight. What it will not tolerate is a sudden threat at close range to itself or its cubs, and its answer to that is fast and total. Over a short distance, a grizzly can run better than 30 miles an hour, far faster than any person alive, so there is no outrunning one and no real time to do anything at all. A sow that believes her cubs are in danger does not rear up and bluff and think it over. She closes the gap and removes the thing that frightened her, and she does it in the first second or two, before a person has finished understanding what they are looking at. Diane came around the bend at a good pace, quiet on the soft trail, and was suddenly only a few yards from the sow and the cubs. There was no distance to work with, and no time to use it. The bear went from the brush to Diane almost instantly, a brown blur closing the gap, and hit her at full weight before she could turn or shout or reach for anything. She went down hard underneath it. What follows a grizzly making contact is short and terrible, the bear using its size and its jaws and its claws on the head, the neck, the shoulders, the parts a person curls to protect, without ever deciding to. There was nothing Diane could do but take it, down in the brush at the side of the trail. And then, as fast as it had come, it was over. The sow, with the thing that had rushed her out of the trees now down and no longer moving toward her cubs, broke off. She gathered the cubs and was gone back into the timber. The whole encounter, from the moment Diane rounded the bend to the moment the bear left, had lasted only seconds, and it left her badly hurt and alone, miles from the nearest road, with no one in sight in either direction. It was the next runner on the course who found her, some minutes later, coming around the same bend into a scene that made no immediate sense at all. He got to her and did what he could, and started shouting for help that was a very long way off. Word made its way back down the course. The race was stopped, and search and rescue began the slow business of reaching a point deep in the forest with no vehicle anywhere near it. The nearest place a truck could get to was miles of rough trail back down the mountain, and everyone and everything had to come in on foot. Every minute of that took time Diane did not have. By the time they reached her and got her started on the long journey toward real help, too much of it had passed and the injuries were too severe. Wildlife officials pieced together afterward what had happened from the tracks and the sign in the brush, a sow with cubs surprised at close range, doing exactly what that kind of bear does. And the animal was not hunted down for it, because it had done nothing a grizzly in that spot does not do. The race changed after that. Bear spray became required gear for every runner on the course. The route was moved away from the worst of the blind timber. And for a long time, the people in that running community could not think about the sport quite the same way. She trained for years. She knew the country. She ran a smart race. It came down to one blind corner, and 2 seconds she never saw coming. The next one was not surprised by anything. He was followed, quietly and patiently, for the better part of an afternoon, by a bear that had decided he was food. The afternoon of September 12, 2015 was gray, and still in the boreal forest of northern Ontario, in Canada, a long way from the nearest town or road. Warren Petrie was working alone that week at a remote site, surveying a stretch of bush for a forestry company, dropped in by float plane and living out of a small camp for days at a stretch. It was the kind of solitude he liked. The forest ran quiet and endless in every direction, spruce and pine and black muskeg, and the only bears he had seen all season were black bears, which in that part of the world are so common that hardly anyone gives them a second thought. Warren was 43, experienced in the bush and easy in it. He knew black bears as the shy, garbage-raiding nuisances they usually are. Animals that huff and run off the moment you shout and wave your arms and make yourself big. That reputation is mostly earned. The great majority of black bears want nothing whatever to do with a person and will go well out of their way to avoid one. It is the very rare exception that kills people, and the exception does not behave anything like the rule. Sometime that afternoon, Warren became aware of a black bear at the edge of his sightline, back in the trees, watching him. He did the normal thing, the thing that works nearly every time. He stood tall, shouted at it, waved his arms, made himself loud and large. The bear did not run. It did not huff, or clack its teeth, or swing its head, or do any of the things a nervous, defensive bear does before it leaves. It simply watched him, steady and unbothered, and when he turned back to his work, it was still there. A while later, when he looked again, it had come closer. It showed no fear of him, and it was giving no warning. It was studying him, the way something studies a thing it means to eat, and it was closing the distance a little at a time, patient and unhurried. A frightened bear makes noise and wants you gone. A silent one that keeps drifting closer and will not be scared off is a far worse thing. Predatory attacks by black bears are rare, but on the rare occasions they happen, they look nothing like the panicked, noisy, defensive swat people expect from a bear. The animal is calm, and it is committed. It stalks, it tests, it comes on in a slow and deliberate way, and it does not answer to shouting and arm waving the way an ordinary bear does, because it has stopped seeing a threat and started seeing a meal. With this kind of bear, the advice most people carry in their heads, to play dead and wait for it to lose interest, is exactly the wrong thing. A predatory bear does not lose interest. Playing dead for one is simply making its work easy. The bear came, the last time, with no change in its manner at all. The same slow, deliberate walk, except this time it did not stop at the edge of the little clearing. Warren threw what was in his hands and roared at it, and it kept coming, and then it dropped the last of the pretense and closed the final distance fast, and was on him. A black bear is not the size of a grizzly, but a big one is far stronger than any man, and this one was fully committed to what it was doing. Warren fought it, and he fought it hard. Everyone who studies these cases will tell you that fighting back is the only real chance a person has against a predatory bear, going for the face and the eyes and the nose, and Warren did all of it. This bear did not turn. It bore him down and stayed on him with a horrible, single-minded patience, working at him the way it would work at any prey it had brought down, and it did not startle and bolt the way a surprised bear would have. There was no one within many miles to hear a sound of it. When it was finished, the forest was exactly as quiet as it had been all day. Everything he did was right, and against a bear that has already decided you are food, right is sometimes not enough. Warren was due to check in by radio that evening, and the call never came. When it did not come again, the next window either, the company began the slow process of getting someone back out to the site, and it was the following day before anyone reached it. What the recovery team found told the story plainly, and made clear this had been no chance meeting gone wrong, but a bear that had hunted a man across an afternoon. The animal was found close by and dealt with by wildlife officers, and the examination done in cases like this showed a bear that was not sick, not injured, not starving in any obvious way, which is the part that stays with people, because it means there is not always a tidy reason to point to afterward. Warren's family was notified. The company changed the way it ran its remote sites. No more single-person camps in that country, and a standing rule that a bear which stands its ground and watches a person is a reason to leave at once, not a thing to note in a logbook. We like to think animals attack because they are hurt or starving or provoked. Sometimes there is no reason like that at all. The next man was asleep when it came for him, in a place where where people are taught from the moment they arrive to expect exactly this, and where he had done very nearly everything right. The night of July 19th, 2013 never truly got dark on Svalbard, the cluster of Norwegian islands high in the Arctic, where the summer sun does not set and the polar bears outnumber the people. A small group had made camp out on the open tundra, well away from the main settlement, for the kind of expedition that draws people to the very far north. Anders Holt was 27, asleep in his tent in the pale gray small hours, with the rest of the group in theirs around him. Out beyond the camp, across the open ground, a polar bear was already moving toward them. Anders was young and fit and careful, on the trip of his life. The group had done the things you are told to do in polar bear country, and they had not done them casually. They had strung a tripwire perimeter around the camp, the kind rigged to fire a warning flare if a bear walks into it. They had a rifle for emergencies. They took turns keeping watch through the endless bright night. Everyone understood the danger, at least in the way you understand a danger you have been briefed about but never seen. Up there, the bear is no scavenger and no nuisance around the bins. It is the top predator of the entire region, an animal that hunts for a living on the sea ice, and to it, a person is simply meat that has wandered out onto its ground. The hard thing about even a good set of defenses is that all of them have to work at the single moment they are needed. A polar bear is an enormous animal, and yet for its size, it can move over open ground almost silently and very low when it is hunting, reading the wind, giving nothing away. This one came in through the flat gray light and either slipped the tripwire or set it off too late to matter. Between it and the sleeping shapes in the tents, there was nothing but a few thin walls of nylon. A tent means nothing to a polar bear. It has spent its whole life forcing its way through snow and ice to the seals beneath, and a wall of fabric over a sleeping shape is no barrier at all. It went to the nearest tent, and the nearest tent was Anders's. People picture polar bears as the dreamy white animals from the documentaries. Up there, they are the most dangerous land predator on Earth, and they hunt people. A polar bear hunts by ambush and by overwhelming force, and it is built to kill seals and even other bears, animals far larger and better armed than an unarmed man in a sleeping bag. In summer, with the sea ice pulled back from the coast, the bears stuck on land are often hungry and will move in on anything that might turn out to be food. A camp full of sleeping people is, to a polar bear working the tundra at night, a row of soft and promising shapes it has every tool in the world to open, and once one of them has committed to a camp, the only thing that reliably stops it is a firearm, put on target by someone who can reach it and use it before the bear is done. The first any of them knew of it was Anders's tent going down and his shout, sharp and then cut short in the gray light. The bear had taken hold of him through the collapsing tent and was already dragging him out and away from the camp with the awful ease of an animal moving a weight that means nothing to it. The rest of the group came awake into the worst sound a person can wake to, and into pure chaos. People shouting, tearing at zippers, scrambling out into the cold trying to understand what was happening in those first blind seconds. Whoever had the rifle had to find it, load it, and get to a place where a shot would strike the bear and not Anders. All of it in a handful of frantic moments in the half-light, while the bear hauled its catch across the ground. They got the rifle up. They fired, and fired again, and drove the animal off, and then they turned everything they had toward Anders. But a polar bear needs only moments to do a person fatal harm, and it had taken more than moments. He did not survive. The bear, badly wounded, was found and put down later. The group got word back to the settlement and help came, but it was already far past the point where anything could be done but the grim work that follows. The authorities on Svalbard investigated the way they do after every bear attack on the islands, and what they found was a camp that had been set up properly and a group that had done nearly everything correctly, and it still was not enough against an animal that size. Anders's family was notified back home. Very little changed in the rules afterward, because the rules had not been the thing that failed. What the story left behind, on Svalbard and well past it, was a plain warning that the polar bear is no photo opportunity, and that the precautions people find so tedious are the thin edge they are standing on. Everyone grumbles about the rifle and the tripwire and the night watch, right up until a night like this one. Then you understand they were never overkill. The next one never saw her bear coming either, but for the opposite reason, because the bear that killed her could barely see or hear her. The morning of March 3rd, 2021 came up hot and dusty at the edge of a forest in central India, where villages sit right up against scrubland that is home to sloth bears. Before full light, the women of the village would go out into the scrub to collect firewood and the mahua flowers that fall in that season, walking the same paths through the thorn and the dry grass that they had walked their whole lives. Sunita Devi was among them that morning, a little apart from the others, working her way along a path she knew as well as the floor of her own house. Somewhere in the scrub just off it, in the gray half-light, a sloth bear was feeding. Sunita was 38, a mother who had gathered from this forest since she was a girl. Everyone in the village knew the bears were out there. They are not rare, and they are not quiet. easy neighbors. But the forest gave the families what they needed: firewood and food and the mahua that could be sold. And so people went into it at dawn and dusk the way they always had, keeping to the known paths, making a little noise as they went, and hoping, the way everyone hopes, that today would turn out like every other day had. A sloth bear is a strange and dangerous animal, and most of what makes it so dangerous comes down to its senses. It has poor eyesight and poor hearing, and it spends its days with its head down and its nose working, tearing into termite mounds and digging out grubs and feeding on fallen fruit and flowers, often genuinely unaware of what is around it. What that means is that a person can walk along a path and come very close to a feeding sloth bear without either of them having the faintest idea, until the gap suddenly closes to a few feet and the bear registers a large shape right on top of it. A sloth bear caught by surprise at that range does not turn and run. It attacks in the same instant with everything it has, out of nothing more than blind terror. Sloth bears hurt more people in India than tigers do, and almost none of it is hunting. It is a half-blind animal getting a terrible fright up close. For its size, the sloth bear is savagely well armed, with long curved claws built to rip open termite mounds baked as hard as brick, and it turns those on a person the same way it would on anything else. A startled sloth bear rears straight up to its full height and goes for the head and the face, biting and slashing at close quarters in a frantic, explosive burst. None of it is for food, and it will not carry anyone off. The whole thing is about destroying the threat in front of it as fast as it possibly can, and the harm it can do to a human face and skull in a few seconds is horrific. Sunita came around a dense stand of thorn and was suddenly right on top of the feeding bear, close enough almost to touch it. The bear reacted in the very same instant, exploding upward off the ground with a roar, and it was on her before she had any chance to react. It rose to its full height against her and struck at her head and her face with those claws, bit down, and bore her over onto the ground, all of it in a chaos of dust and noise. The other women, strung out along the path behind her, heard the roar and her cries and came running toward her, shouting as they came. And that is the one thing that helps, because numbers and noise will sometimes drive a sloth bear off where a lone person can do nothing at all. Faced with more people rushing in at it, the bear broke off and crashed away into the scrub as suddenly as it had begun. But the damage of those few seconds was already done. The women reached Sunita where she lay and saw at once how terrible it was. The other women reaching her with noise is the only reason it stopped. On her own, against those claws, she never had a chance. The women half-carried Sunita back toward the village and out to the road, and from there began the long and desperate effort to reach a hospital that was hours away over bad roads, the way it so often is for people who live pressed up against the forest. Her injuries were beyond anything that could be reached in time. The forest officers recorded the attack, one of a great many in that district in a bad year for it, and the bear was never found. Having slipped back into scrub it knew far better than anyone hunting it ever would. In the village it changed the shape of the mornings for a while. People went out in bigger groups and made more noise, and kept off the closest, thickest paths, even as everyone understood that sooner or later, the plain need for what the forest gave would pull them back to the old ways and the old paths again. These are the attacks the world never hears about. A woman out before dawn to gather what her family needed, where that ordinary work can cost everything. The next man was high on a mountain on the far side of the world, pushing through brush so thick he could not see his own boots, let alone whatever was in it, with him. The morning of May 24th, 2017 was cool and green on a mountainside on Hokkaido, the northern island of Japan, where the spring draws people up into the hills to gather the wild mountain vegetables that come with the season. That same spring draws out the brown bears, the big Ussuri bears that live in those mountains, lean and hungry and moving hard after the long winter. Haruki Sato was 66, up on the slope early, with a bag for the young shoots and ferns that are prized so highly at that time of year. He had gathered on this mountain every spring for the better part of his life. Haruki was a retired man who knew these slopes about as well as anyone alive, and he knew about the bears too. Everyone on Hokkaido does. The brown bears here are large, powerful animals, and the spring, when they come out lean and foraging hard and some of the sows have new cubs, is the worst possible time to cross paths with one. But the mountain vegetables come up in the spring and at no other time, and so the pickers and the bears end up on the very same slopes in the very same few weeks, year after year. The vegetables Haruki was after grew thickest in the sasa, the low mountain bamboo that covers those slopes in a dense green sea higher than a person's waist, and so thick you cannot see into it more than an arm's length. A picker works bent over inside it, moving slowly, eyes down on the ground, living for an hour at a time in a little world only a few feet across. A bear feeding through that same bamboo is every bit as blind to what is around it, and every bit as slow to notice, its own head down, working the ground. Two of them can move toward each other through that green for a long while, each completely hidden from the other, until only a screen of bamboo a few feet thick is left between them. Somewhere in the sasa above Haruki that morning, a brown bear was feeding its way slowly downhill. The bamboo is the whole danger here. It hides the bear and the picker from each other until they are close enough to touch. An Usuri brown bear is a large and powerful animal, every bit the equal of a grizzly, and a hungry one in spring is in no forgiving mood. Surprised at a few feet in heavy cover, it reacts the way brown bears the world over react, with an instant, overwhelming defensive attack, and in that season, it may also be guarding a carcass or a patch of feeding it has claimed as its own. Either way, the person who has pushed through the last of the brush to arm's length has no room to move and no time to use. Over those few feet, the bear is on them before they have even finished being startled. Haruki worked his way up into the sasa, parting the bamboo with his hands, eyes down, and pushed through the last green screen of it straight into the bear at almost point-blank range. The animal came at him in the same breath. There was no space in that bamboo to run, and nothing anywhere to climb, and a brown bear over a few feet is quicker than a thought. It knocked him down into the sasa and set on him with the terrible efficiency of a big bear at close quarters, its jaws and its claws and its whole weight, working at his head and his upper body while he was down in the green with no way to roll clear or get to his feet. The same thick bamboo that had hidden the bear on the way in now hid the whole of it, so that even another picker working the slope a short way off would have heard a heavy commotion somewhere in the sasa and been able to see nothing at all. When the bear had finished driving off the thing it had run headlong into, it left him where he lay and moved on up the slope after the feeding it had come for. When Haruki did not come down off the mountain by the middle of the day and did not answer when he was called, other pickers and then a proper search party went up the slope after him. Finding one man in a sea of chest-high bamboo is slow and exhausting work, and it was a long time before they came on the place. He had not survived. The authorities recorded it as one more in a run of bear encounters that had been getting steadily worse across Hokkaido as the bear numbers climbed and more of the animals ranged closer to the places people go. They warned the pickers, the way they did every spring, to go up in groups, to carry bells and radios and make plenty of noise, to keep out of the very thickest cover. And every spring the vegetables come up in exactly that thickest cover, and people go in after them, because that is where they have always grown and where they always will. No bell is loud enough to fix the real trouble, which is two half-blind foragers pushing through the same bamboo toward each other. Sometimes they simply meet. The last one met her bear out in the open, on a marked trail, in full daylight, with the animal in plain sight the whole time, which should have been the safest way of all. The afternoon of July 6th, 2022 was warm and clear in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania, on a marked hiking trail that climbed up through beech forest toward a high meadow. Romania holds the largest brown bear population anywhere in Europe, thousands of them across these mountains. And along the busier trails and roads, a good many of them have learned over the years that the presence of people tends to mean the presence of food. Ioana Petrescu was 34, hiking up the trail on a fine afternoon when she saw a bear ahead of her at the edge of the trees. Ioana was a fit and experienced hiker who had walked these mountains many times. Seeing a bear here was not, by itself, a great shock. Along these trails, the bears were spotted fairly often, usually moving off about their own business, and a whole culture of stopping to watch them and take a photograph had grown up around it, encouraged for years by people pulling their cars over on the mountain roads to throw food to the bears that came down to expect it. That habituation is where the real danger lives. A wild bear that has learned to link people with an easy meal is no longer truly a wild bear that keeps its distance. The bear ahead of Ioana did not melt away into the trees the way a genuinely wild one almost always would. It stayed where it was, and it was plainly interested in her, and that alone should have been the warning. A bear that holds its ground and drifts toward people has almost always been fed by them somewhere along the line, and has lost the fear that keeps a wild bear at arm's length. Ioana did what a great many people on that trail had done before her, without anything at all going wrong. She stopped, and she stayed to watch the bear, and she brought out her phone. And in doing all of that, she let the space between them shrink instead of steadily giving ground and backing away down the trail. The bear kept coming, unhurried and unafraid, straight up the path toward her. Every bear that kills a hiker like this was made, not born. Years of people tossing food from car windows taught it that people mean an easy meal. A habituated brown bear is unpredictable in a way a truly wild one is not. It has no fear left to hold it back. And yet it is still a large, wild predator with a short temper and enormous strength, and the very calm that looks so much like tameness can flip in a heartbeat if the animal feels crowded, or startled, or simply decides to take what it wants from the person in front of it. And when a bear that size does commit, out on open ground, a person on foot has no speed to escape with, and nothing whatever to match its strength. Every foot of distance a person gives away while standing still and filming is distance. They will never get back. Exactly how it turned, no one can say for certain, but at some point the bear covered the last of the ground between them and was on her. It may have been startled by a movement, or felt cornered on the narrow trail, or simply closed the gap and decided. Out in the open in broad daylight, it made no difference at all to how it ended. The bear knocked Ioana off the trail and down the slope into the trees, and a brown bear that has a person down uses its size and its jaws and its claws just as its cousins do the world over. Other hikers further down the trail heard the noise of it and came climbing up toward her, shouting as they came, and in the end, their numbers and their noise drove the bear back off her and away into the forest. But the animal had already dragged her well off the path and down the slope, and getting to her cost more time on top of everything else. By the time they reached her, she was terribly hurt, and the bear was already gone somewhere above them on the mountain. The other hikers managed to get a call out, and mountain rescue came, but the trail was steep and the ground below it hard, and she had been carried a long way down off the path, and it was a long time before she could be reached and brought back out. She did not survive. The attack became national news because it had happened on a popular, well-marked trail and not out in some far corner of the wilderness, and it forced a hard conversation the country had been putting off for years about too many bears, too much feeding, and far too many people treating a large wild predator as a roadside attraction. The trail was closed for a while. There was talk of managing the bears differently, of stamping out the feeding once and for all. Whether much of it holds, the coming years will show, but the habit that made that bear what it was had been building for a very long time, and one terrible afternoon was not going to undo it. Wild bears that fear people mostly leave them be. The dangerous ones are the ones we taught not to fear us, and that is on us.